All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Text Lab. Todd, we've been getting some feedback about how fast we talk in the Text Lab.
Oh, yeah. I think we ought to speed it up a little bit.
Go a little bit faster.
I think quicker would be better.
I'm just hoping that if people watch this on 2 times speed, it'll actually be like watching it, on like 4 or 5 times speed, and you can get through this.
Well, that's pretty much what it is. I think both you and I go at a certain rate. We live at a certain rate. We think at a certain rate.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it's good. I'm not sure there's been a quality thought. But at least we're thinking fast.
We need some feedback on those YouTube comments. On
there you go.
Too fast, too slow. You've been busy of late, helping plant a church in Orangevale, from what I hear.
It's pretty fun. We got a bunch of us planting a church. Again, from where I sit, this is the first time I've been on site when we actually launched a church. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
So to see the leveraging of resources around here and how this is designed, and we got so many teams, it's just much more effective way to plant a church than just sending a guy up there and, hey, good luck.
Yeah, totally.
But the resources that come and the planning, the design, the whole thing, it's been really cool to witness from this close a chair.
Yeah, that's super cool. For those who might not be tracking as closely with what's going on in Orangevale, what's kind of just the update? There's doing some preview services right now, getting fully launched in the next few weeks, months. What's kind of the latest Orangevale update?
Yeah, so the third preview service will be this week. And again, because of the way we do it, they're pretty dialed in already, right?
Yeah.
And just really small things that they've been able to tweak. But come the first Sunday in March, we will launch, and there will be services out there every Sunday going forward.
So cool. It's so fun to see something that starts as really an idea, a prayer of, okay, God, would you want to do something in Orangevale? Over the years now come to full fruition. And have you been helping Paul or hindering Paul in that process?
It all depends on your perspective. I like to think of it as helping, but you know me. The reality is there could be far more hindrances.
A little bit of both, all mixed up together.
It is all part of it.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's good to be back on the Text Lab. We're in Matthew 13:53, basically to the end of chapter 13 through verse 58. And this is a real shift now in the narrative. Jesus has finished the parables. That's what he kind of told over and over again throughout all of chapter 13. And now he's moving from demonstrating what the kingdom of God is like. He was talking about it is hidden and it's surprising. It's something that grows, to now showing how people are responding again to actually the kingdom being lived out and played out in people's lives as he goes back to his hometown in Nazareth, and we're going to see how they respond to Jesus as he comes and teaches. Anything that you feel like Matthew is highlighting here? Again, always want to start here on just the logic and flow of Matthew as a whole.
Well, I think the bigger flow here is, like you said, we're turning a corner now, and we're going to see the opposition escalate to some degree after the disciples just said, we understand, and we talked about it. They understood a lot, not everything, but they didn't it wasn't that they did nothing, but we're actually going to see, too, that they didn't get quite as much as they maybe thought they had at the answer. So you're going to see this escalation in opposition and animosity towards Jesus increase. And we're moving towards the cross here now.
Continuing to move towards the cross. Let me start reading for us in verse 53. It says, "And when Jesus had finished these parables, he went away from there. And coming to his hometown, he taught them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished, and said, 'Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things?' And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, 'A prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and in his own household.' And he did not do many works there because of their unbelief." So you have Jesus coming back. I mean, hometown hero moment here. You would expect this. Jesus has been out doing this ministry. He's coming back to Nazareth, and he goes from doing these parables. He went away from there. I think that is part of that theological shift, not just a geographical shift, but Matthew's kind of emphasizing he's done doing those parables. Now we're going to see what happens next. Goes to his hometown and goes to the synagogue, which I was doing a little bit of study on this. This wouldn't have been uncommon for someone to stand up and teach. They didn't have necessarily the same person, rabbi, teach every single week, but this also wasn't just like open mic night at the synagogue. This wasn't just like karaoke and Jesus kind of stood up. They would have heard about his ministry. They would have had many people who had seen him doing the miracles, heard about his teaching. So he comes and he stands up and he teaches in the synagogue, and they were astonished. But that astonishment wasn't necessarily a good thing. It leads to basically skepticism very quickly. As you're thinking about the big idea and just kind of what Matthew's unfolding in this narrative, what stands out to you that he's really trying to communicate with this text as a whole?
There's a lot of questions there. So I actually see the astonishment as a good thing.
Okay.
I think they're fascinated. I mean, what I think the point Matthew's trying to make here is, no, they're seeing evidence that this guy is different than everybody else. They're astonished with his teaching as they ask that question. Whether they saw his mighty works, the miracles, or where they heard about him, it doesn't matter. But his teaching and who he is, they are going, wow. They are going, wow. They're seeing the evidence. They're getting that. It's just their response. Right. And so even the question is going to be repeated essentially twice. Where did this man get his wisdom and his mighty works? The first reading, without reading the whole pericope here, the whole piece, you might think that's a legitimate question. Where did he get this? But when you read it in the narrative here, I think it's more of, who does he think he is? Who does he think he is claiming and teaching? There's an authority. There's a wisdom here. There's something that I think is most likely a little convicting. But who is this guy? And you list all his brothers, likely all his brothers, and then he lists his sister. I mean, who is this? We know this guy. He's a nobody, right? And now he's speaking with this authority. What does he think he's doing coming here? And again, if you ask me what the big idea is I think it's essentially, here we see, people are going to resist Jesus for all kinds of reasons, but familiarity here doesn't actually help what you and I would guess it is, right? I got a kid, his name was Otto Kemp from our church down south, that he got pulled up with the Phillies last year. I'm telling you, we're celebrating that. And that's what I think, again, Matthew is trying to show us here, Jesus is trying to show us here. This rejection to Jesus, to some degree, going back to the parable of the sower, you're going to have people reject. You got the weed parable. Don't be surprised, because to the king, he's going to be dealing with that as well. So there's lots of ideas.
It's almost their familiarity, just to start with that big idea again, though. It's almost their familiarity with Jesus causes them to miss it.
Who is he? They have these preconceived notions about who he is. They watched him for likely most of his life. He was a nobody. Again, you keep looking back to this kingdom that's being revealed. You don't build kingdoms with a nobody. A nobody doesn't stand up in the synagogue and talk with that kind of authority, even though I think they're astonished by it. They're marveled at it, right? I think it's getting into their hearts. Who are you? And if you really have this authority, it has implications for them that are likely submit and adore, and they're not going to do that because he's a nobody. He's no better than them. That's what their presupposition is.
And Matthew kind of highlights that in 55, where he talks about, is this not the carpenter's son? Like you said, they would have known and seen Jesus for 30 years doing carpentry work, probably with stone, some wood mixed together. That was his craft. An anonymous guy in their hometown. Think about a small village of 2,000 to 3,000 people. They knew Jesus. This is just the carpenter, isn't it? Isn't it his mother Mary? I think there's a little bit, maybe of a little bit of a hint of, a little bit of the Jesus kind of controversial birth there, and a little bit of a slander. Like, isn't his mother Mary? Like, most people would have been defined by their father in this time, and so it's like, we know what something sketchy was going on at Jesus' birth, and we know his brothers and his sisters, they weren't even believing in Jesus at his time. They kind of list this list of witnesses off to basically, like, we know that Jesus is a nobody. What's going on here?
He has no right, I think, in their mind, with the way they're looking at it, their presuppositions from heaven. You have no right to stand in the synagogue and speak with this authority. The folks that do that, they've been trained. They're usually from Jerusalem. They ain't from Nazareth, right? They're not nobodies, unschooled nobodies. And so you go back to even how we finished last week with that last parable, the scribe, right? Where I think he's talking to the disciples. I mean, God's plan is just crazy to use ordinary people. You guys are actually the scribes that you probably at this point in time, if we go back to last week's text, probably know more about the kingdom, this realized kingdom coming in Jesus, than anybody else. Than all the guys that had all the academic training, all the religious training, the Pharisees, that said, these 12 knuckleheads have more of it. I mean, it's crazy. And it's interesting how that then leads to them taking offense at Jesus. The fact that
God's plan is to use these nobodies, these unschooled men. Jesus wouldn't have gone to rabbinical training. He wasn't from a wealthy family. He wasn't well known. He wasn't from Jerusalem.
This is not the way you do it.
Yeah, it's not the way that you do it. It is keeping in this pattern of an upside-down kingdom, a hidden kingdom, the mysteries of God being revealed, a baby that comes in a stable, this quiet entrance into the world. Matthew, again, is pointing that out and pointing out, I think, again, how people then are missing Jesus because he's not fitting into their categories. He's not what they expected for a king who was going to come and who was going to rule. And you see the response. I think this is important that Matthew points this out, that they took offense at him. They're seeing this picture of Jesus, and they're offended. They're offended by the authority with which he's teaching, the fact that he's doing these things. What do you think Matthew is highlighting when he's demonstrating their response then to Jesus?
Well, I think you nailed it. They're offended. It's just how crazy, right?
Yeah.
Because you got to have evidence, I think, to come to a real saving faith. But what's trying to be cleared here, part of the point, I think, if you follow the logic and the flow, even back to the parables, it's not just the evidence alone, right?
Yeah.
God in his spirit has to be leading you to believe this stuff. He's involved. No denying of the responsibility, right? Yeah. Because I would feel like the people who ought to have seen this most were the guys that saw him and be amazed by it. But right, when you see the beauty of Jesus, you got to make some response, right? One of two, and how crazy it is that the folks that he should have been the most familiar with, they didn't get it.
That feels like a big theme of Matthew's gospel as a whole, of the people that you would expect to understand, who you would have expected to see Jesus. The ones you would have expected to welcome Jesus are the ones that are missing him. They're rejecting him. They're not recognizing, or maybe they're even astonished. I think this is an interesting contrast between being astonished and then being offended that Matthew kind of highlights there. They are astonished. They are amazed. That pops up a lot, actually, throughout the Gospels. People see something that Jesus does, a miracle, and they are amazed at what he's doing. They're curious, but that doesn't always lead to belief. That doesn't always lead to trust and to following. It doesn't always lead to discipleship, being amazed at what Jesus is doing. There's a difference there that I feel like Matthew is highlighting, and he highlights their offense at Jesus there.
Right, and we're going to see it. We've seen it with the religious leaders already. It's what's going to escalate here. But the religious teachers, those who had the most formal training in the Old Testament, I think, again, they misunderstood. Yeah. But we're going to see this pattern. To some degree, those who we think should have got it most. Romans 9-11 is in the middle of the book of Romans. And a guy named John Piper wrote his doctoral dissertation on explaining what his point is there. The book of Romans, you can go right from chapter 8 or right into chapter 12, but it's about this. He's writing to Gentile Christians who are struggling to some degree. Why would we believe in this Jesus who is being rejected en masse by the Jews? Yeah. And Paul's point, who didn't get it until he met Jesus on the way on the road, bright light, all that stuff. Paul's going back to the Old Testament, interpreting differently, going, you should actually trust in Christ because the prediction from the Old Testament was that the Jews were actually going to reject him. And so if you know the Old Testament, you go back there, you see this pattern. It's so close, even in his hometown, right? Those who should have gotten it, they didn't, over and over again. And he's just going to go, that I'm not going to waste my time continuing to do miracles here. I'm not here to be a magician. I'm not here to be some artist that just fascinates you with these miracles. These miracles are intended to give evidence to who I am, that you come to faith. And if it's not working that way, I'll move on.
Yeah, and I think Jesus then points to how all of this Old Testament is building and pointing up to him. He quotes Psalm 78 here again, just to highlight for our listeners how every single passage here of Matthew, there's this intertwine with the Old Testament. I mean, I feel like almost every podcast we do, there's this callback that Jesus is doing to Isaiah, to somewhere in the Old Testament saying, this is all pointing to me. And he does that again here. That in verse 57, he's quoting Psalm 78 there. And then he says, this has been the pattern of prophets basically throughout all of the Old Testament, that they have been rejected by the people who should have been listening and receiving their message. And Matthew ends it with that Jesus did not do many works there because of their unbelief. Unpack that for us a little bit. What do you think Matthew's highlighting there about the connection between belief and maybe seeing and experiencing God's work. People take that to mean a lot of different things in different church cultures and different environments, and I think we have to be wise and thoughtful about what Matthew is actually saying here, because there is a whole name it and claim it movement about, hey, you just have enough faith, you can move a mountain, you can kind of make this thing happen, and that feels like that gets distorted. But what is Matthew saying here between the connection of faith and seeing God?
I thought I dealt with that a little bit in his prior comments, but the big idea to me again is that miracles were intended to bring people to faith.
Right.
They weren't just to fascinate people. They just weren't to entertain. And he's already demonstrated they're astonished by his mighty works already, but it's not leading to belief. So he's not going to continue to do this with their hardness of heart, right? But whatever it is, their own pride, they're feeling like they don't measure up, whatever it is they're doing. But he's going to move on to someplace else.
Yep. And I do think there is this emphasis that they didn't have faith in Jesus. They didn't see and recognize him. And because of that, he didn't do many works there. Like, he really was like, if this is your choice to reject me, Jesus isn't going to continue to
I've already
force
done them. To some degree,
happen.
they've already been astonished by him.
Yep.
And so I'm not going to continue to do this, that if you enjoy it, it's merely for your own personal pleasure rather than seeing it as evidence that I'm the Messiah because you're rejecting me.
Yeah. On a personal level, I was just thinking about our listeners, as we have a lot of people who maybe have even grown up in the church. And there's a way that I think familiarity can breed almost contempt or cause us to miss Jesus for what he is doing, or also people that are maybe just distracted by other things in our lives that can cause us to miss Jesus who is right in front of us. In some sense, it was their familiarity with Jesus that caused them to miss him. In some sense, it was also just he didn't fit what they expected. He wasn't fitting their categories of, man, somebody who's coming in as a king does it like this. Someone who is a trained teacher goes to this rabbi school, so I'm not going to listen to you. Thinking about it on a personal level, what's kind of some application points from this for how do we not miss Jesus when he's right in our midst, or that we don't get distracted by other things and miss his message, his word for us?
Right, it's familiarity. I think particularly of those of us who are raised in the church. Dallas Willard talked about confusing the treasure with the vessel. The treasure is Jesus. The vessel is all the stuff we do to hopefully point to Jesus, and we can equate the two. I look back, I've shared a little bit about how I came to faith, and I thought I was a Christian. I said these words. I was fitting into theology. I had some preconceived notions of what faith was from, I'm just going to say, not that great a theology that I grew up with. But I was in the church all the life. I thought I was a Christian, and it was that parable, Matthew 13:44 again, that I'm like, you got to treasure Jesus above all else. So examining some of our preconceived notions. Heck, I grew up, even when I first became a pastor, there were worship wars. Where, you know, Jesus worshiped with organs and with choirs and with ropes. I mean, I look back at this stuff where we had these preconceived notions of even what church is supposed to be, right? What are those things that we hold about Christianity, about Jesus, about faith, that may not actually be that important, that are vessel issues rather than the treasure issue. Keep it flowing. Part of what I love about here is I don't think we have any sacred vessels, right? We're going to do things as best we can to help people see the treasure, and we're constantly asking and trying to evaluate what's the best way to use our time, our resources to help people see Jesus. But it's a huge one for me because my familiarity with the church led me to believe I was a Christian when I actually wasn't.
Which I think is an important step from this passage to be like, how do I pause and actually do a little bit of examination, do a little bit of work of, okay, what's actually going on in my own heart? Am I actually trusting and treasuring Jesus at a deep level? Am I actually continuing to get off the throne of my heart? Because I think one of my greatest pastoral fears is that there can be a lot of people who come to church regularly who do spiritual things but aren't actually trusting, treasuring Jesus. They maybe are doing religious practices. They're maybe trying to kind of be a good person, but there hasn't been this encounter with the Messiah. And I think that's what Jesus is pointing out. This isn't about just being near me. Proximity does not equal intimacy. Like, they were around Jesus for 30 years. They knew about him, but they didn't know him personally in a surrender to him as Lord, surrender to him as Messiah, and now come follow him, join in as his disciple. And so I think this passage is a good place to pause, to do some of that work and do some of that examination and reflection of where might I be missing Jesus because I'm just kind of a little bit too close to all the different vessels there and miss the treasure.
One of my favorite questions, and it's almost exclusively with men, right? Lunch, breakfast, coffee, whatever. But hey, so what's going on with you and Jesus? I can tell you, most time the answer is, I'm on the church softball team. I'm working with the students on Wednesday night, and that's not really my question. My question is, what's going on with you and Jesus? And that's where I get concerned sometimes. Their familiarity, their being a part of this vessel that we call the church, that they're assuming that necessarily means there's a tight relationship with Jesus. I think the questions you're encouraging us to ask are fabulous ones.
Love it. Well, and then last point here is I'm encouraged from this passage because later on you see that some of Jesus' brothers, they do come and follow him. James becomes kind of this cornerstone for the church in Jerusalem. Judas here writes the book of Jude. There is this recognition eventually of Jesus is the Messiah. Their familiarity at this point keeping them from Christ. God continues to do a work. Seeds that have been planted continue to grow, and they recognize Jesus and they follow him and worship him as King and as Messiah. So yeah, I'm encouraged by that and that God is continuing to do that work.
And you guys, again, going back to the parables, keep sowing. A lot of people are going to reject all that stuff. Hey, it happened to the king too. I mean, if it's happening to him, don't expect that that's not going to be happening to you as you go out and share. Keep sowing, keep going.
Cool. Good stuff. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll catch you next time on the Text Lab.